This is our monthly meeting for the Michiana division of the Midwest region of the National Model Railroad Association. Wow, that's a long name. And so we do get together on Thursday nights also, and we do a Zoom every Thursday night at 6:30 Central, 7:30 Eastern. If you're interested in getting in on that and you are not receiving the invitations, you can send me a message. We are streaming live on Facebook as well this morning, as I mentioned, and we have 3 people there, maybe just 2 besides me. I think they're probably counting me. But that's a new thing, so we'll see how that goes. The people on Facebook, of course, I suppose they could probably comment and I would see it maybe if I looked. But I'll be a little busy because the main program today is a presentation on modeling a paper mill. And so we'll begin that in a moment. The board of directors did meet last week. We've planned some outings going into 2023 through June. And so that'll be coming out in the newsletter. We are going to meet via Zoom in January and February, and we're looking for clinics. So if anybody would like to present a clinic for our division on Saturday mornings, usually. We also changed, by the way, we have been meeting on the 3rd Saturday every month, and we decided to move that to the 2nd Saturday because a lot of us we're right next to NCR Division 9, and we often are able to go to Division 9 events, and we wanted to make it easier for our members to participate in those events and for NCR Division 9 to be able to come to our events. So starting in January, we'll be moving to the 2nd Saturday of the month for these meetings. And so that'll all be coming out in email and on our group IO and in the newsletter and all that good stuff. But that's what's going on. So is there any other announcements or business that anybody would like to talk about before we begin the presentation?
Greg, I've got a question.
Sure.
But how long do you expect this to last? I will probably have to leave early.
Oh, okay, that's no problem. And this is being recorded, so we'll be posting it to our YouTube channel, but we'll probably go about 45 minutes or so, I would expect.
Oh, fine. Okay, then I can stay.
Okay, great. All right, anything else? We'll get started. Let's see if I can share my screen and all this stuff works. Okay. Now I got to get to. All right, here we go. Everybody see that all right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, we're underway. I'm going to get this out of my way. Okay, so today we're going to talk about modeling a paper mill in HO scale, and it'll be based on the Kimberly-Clark mill in Niagara, Wisconsin, around 1963. I'll be talking a little bit more about my layout in general as well. The picture that is here on the title screen is an older picture. You can see the track is not ballasted, and actually those pulp bins that are sitting there have been moved, and so that's you'll see there's still a little the foundations are still there, just like in real life when things like that happen. There we leave a trace. But anyway, this building now is white, but we'll get to all that. Our agenda, we'll talk a little bit in general about how paper is made and where papers come from and how the techniques of making paper have changed. The good news, of course, is on a model railroad, we don't actually have to make paper, but it's nice to be able to know these things so that the modeling that you do is more prototypical. We'll talk a little about the history of Niagara, Wisconsin, and the Kimberly-Clark paper mill there. It's actually gone now. I think it's been torn down. It was sold by Kimberly-Clark in the 70s, and then it was another company. I can't remember the name. And anyway, I think it's all gone now. But then we'll get into my layout and how this mill fits into the layout. We'll talk about, in general, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about how the models were built, Most of these models are kits, although there are some models here that are scratch built, and then there's some kit bashing that went on. And then I'll talk a little bit about how Niagara fits into the operating scheme. My layout is still very much unfinished, so we haven't run formal operations on this layout, but I am capable of switching Niagara, so I'll talk a little bit about how that works and how I expect that to fit into the overall scheme, and then some of the next steps that are going to be happening in Niagara to make it better. The first thing here, how paper is made. So this picture here is a calendaring. These are calendaring machines. This is they're used to dry the paper, but the paper started being made, or papyrus really was the predecessor. It was a little different than paper, but that started being used by Egyptians over 5,000 years ago. What we know as paper really started in China around the 1st century, and all that paper was made out of cloth, rags and linen. Into the 1400s, when we start seeing Gutenberg and the printing press, paper is still made out of cloth at that point, and the big problem is shortage of that. There, of course, cloth is used for many things, and so it isn't until the late actually the mid 1800s, skipping ahead a little here, that wood pulp begins to be used. In 1690, we see a colonial paper mill in Germantown, Pennsylvania. So that is the first mill in this part of the world. The wire mesh that becomes very important to industrial paper making comes in the late 1700s. This allows us to make these giant rolls of paper that are seamless. In 1806, this Fordrinier machine is patented by 2 brothers, and this is really important to automating the process of making paper. Prior to that, each sheet of paper was basically made individually, and so these industrial inventions of the wire mesh and the Fordrinier machine makes this enables paper making to really scale. As I mentioned, in the 1860s, the ability to make wood pulp mechanically allows wood then to become the material that is more commonly used for paper making. Now you can still buy linen paper, which is made of cloth, but it's much more expensive. And it's the wood pulp, of course, that scaled that industry to the point where in the 20th century, these processes and equipment improved to the point where paper becomes used for many things, including packaging. Cardboard is invented to replace wood crates, which were used for shipping. And so a lot of the things that we just take for granted now in the modern world, the ability to make paper and paper products efficiently have had a huge impact on that. So this is a diagram and infographic that shows how paper is made. Now I model 1963. There's not a ton of paper recycling going on in 1963. So what I model does not include recycling. This is a modern graphic, and it shows both starting with wood, with trees over here, and how that process works. And then it becomes this continuous cycle as paper is recycled and made back into new paper. The process I'm modeling, forestry, produces the wood that is then made into pulp. Pulpwood is different than the lumber that is used for building houses and things like that. But pulpwood makes its way to a building of some sort where it is debarked and chipped. The bark is stripped off and is not used. Many places, many mills will use that bark then to help create energy. The process of paper making requires a tremendous amount of energy. So many of them would use steam originally, hydraulic power, and various other sources of energy, including recycling of waste material. Once the wood is chipped into small chips, it goes into these pulping bins. Some of these bins will use chemicals to break down the wood, and others will use mechanical beaters. And so that creates what we know as pulp then. That pulp is put into another area where it's washed and screened. It may also be bleached at that point, and then it goes into this machine, which is called a Fourdrinier machine. And I've got some detail on that, but basically it gets spread out on a metal mesh, which is a conveyor, and it becomes this long sheet that is rolled up in the end. You can see in this graphic here, they show some of these cylinders that the paper passes through have felt involved in drying that what becomes paper, and then heat is also applied to dry it out, and then the cylinders at the end of that process press the paper and give it a finish. And at that point, it's rolled into a calendaring section. It may also go through a section where it's coated, or other additives added to it to give it properties appropriate to its final use. And at that point, it is either rolled up or cut into giant pieces for shipping. Most of the time, then it is shipped to a manufacturer who is either using it for newspapers or to make cardboard or other wrapping paper, what have you. And at those sites, then it is further cut into its final form. This is a little bigger graphic showing how a Fourdrinier machine works. So you can see here the head box is where that pulp starts out. It gets spread out across this wire mesh, goes into this section here where it starts to be dried and to take its final form. There's a drying section here where it's heated, and then it goes into the calendar section where it's pressed, giving it its finish. As far as rail cars go, and this is a more recent picture on my layout, I do not use very prototypical rail cars yet. They're close, but I haven't gotten to the point where I've really nailed it down to what would be perfectly prototypical. But we use box cars to carry finished products, paper that's been rolled, boxed, or palleted for shipment. Gondolas are used for typically for pulpwood and wood chips. Some of those gondolas are altered with higher sides because especially wood chips are not very dense. And so to get as much weight in there as possible, some gondolas have been given larger sides. I searched all day yesterday for a picture. I know I have somewhere. I know you guys all know what that's like. But in this area in northern Michigan, they typically use gondolas, and they would usually use pulpwood logs, which I think are about 4 foot long, and they would stack those vertically around the edge of the gondola to give it more capacity, and then pulpwood would be stacked within those vertically positioned pulpwood logs. Bulkhead flat cars are a more modern way of carrying pulpwood. That's what I use right now on my layout. My friend Maynard Mitchell has done a great job of building gondolas with loads that really look like what was going on in the 60s in the North Woods, and he has shared that information with me. So that's what I'll be doing when I get to that stage on the layout. But bulkhead flat cars are typical in later eras. Tank cars are used for many of the chemicals and additives, chlorine, sulfuric acid, Kaolin is sometimes shipped as a slurry in a tank car. Clays such as that, starch, other powdered materials these days are shipped in covered hoppers after, say, the late 50s, early 60s. And prior to that, they might be shipped in bags in box cars. So, but it's nice modeling something like this. You have a lot of covered loads. So the only one that's kind of hard to model empties are the bulkhead flat cars or the gondolas full of wood chips, but we'll figure that out. So on my layout, Niagara, Wisconsin is an important component of the layout. I modeled the ore traffic, and we'll get more into that a little later, in the Upper Peninsula between Iron Mountain and Escanaba. Niagara is a small branch line off of the main line coming out of Iron Mountain in Kinnesek. So actually, and I think I'll get into it in this section, I found some artifacts from Niagara early in my modeling history that have stayed with me. And so this part of the layout's real special to me. This is a picture of the mill. The mill goes off here to the left. This is Lower Kinnesek Falls, and you can see there's a hydraulic power facility there. And we'll get more into that, but this is an older photo. I think this is from the 20s or something like that. I can't remember. So the history of the mill was actually built in the 1860s, I want to say. I think Stovekin is the guy, or Stovekin, something like that, who built the mill. It was a very small operation. The Badger Paper Company bought the mill after that, and it was still a very small operation until 1897, 1898, when it was acquired by Kimberly and Clark, which at that time was a huge producer of paper products in the Midwest. At that time, the town was known as Kinnesek Falls, Wisconsin. When they purchased the mill, they tore it down and they put up a new mill. It was one of the world's largest mills at the time, and it was set up for producing wrapping paper, manila paper, and they also sold pulp to other mills. And the project to build that mill was named Niagara. The falls there look like a little Niagara Falls, a miniature Niagara Falls. So that's where the name came from. They actually changed the name of the town soon after that because the mill was so important to the local economy. In 1901, there was a fire at another Kimberly-Clark plant, which was in Appleton, Wisconsin. That plant was at that time producing newsprint for the newspapers in Milwaukee. And when the fire burned that plant down, they converted the Niagara Mill in 4 weeks to produce newsprint. And so then for about 15 or 16 years, that mill, this mill in Niagara, produced nothing but newsprint for newspapers in Milwaukee. Niagara was very much a company town in kind of the model of Pullman in Chicago. This photo here shows a lot of the company, company houses that were built by Kimberly-Clark and either rented or sold to the workers at the mill. They also built a community clubhouse that's shown down here in the lower left, and ultimately they built a pool there. The Menominee River provides water for the mill, and was also the site of many drownings. The town lost about one person a year to drowning in the Menominee River, and so they felt it was very important to build a swimming pool to keep the kids out of the river. And so they did that right outside this clubhouse. That relationship really persisted through the 60s until ultimately Kimberly-Clark got out of the coated papers business, and so they sold this mill and a lot of others. Storo Enso, I think, is the company that bought it after that. But that's after my era, so I don't pay as much attention to that. As far as how the mill evolved, as I mentioned, in 1901, they converted over to newsprint from Manila paper. In 1960, they remodeled the entire facility to go back to coated paper. This time it was designed more for magazines and catalogs and things like this. At that time, they installed the giant turbines in that hydraulic facility. And those turbines were actually also they were used to generate energy, but they were also used to turn the gears on the debarking machine, which was co-located with that dam. And so that's part of what I'm scratch building on the layout. Mine doesn't work, obviously, so it's quite a fantasy, but it's meant to at least evoke the memory of that. In 1945, they added on a new building with two giant machines that allowed a 246-inch width of this paper on a large Fort Drinier machine, and they were moving paper through there at 1,500 feet per minute, which was twice as fast as their old mill. In 1959, which is the era I model, they improved that up to 2,000 feet per minute and included a kraft repulper. Kraft is a strengthening process, and so it's basically a separate pulping mill that where they process the paper ahead of the final processing. And they also added a finishing line for wrapping and inspecting the paper. All right, so that's the history of Niagara, more than you ever wanted to know about Niagara, Wisconsin. This is another picture of the mill from the 20s. And this big building, I'm not sure if this building or this building, one of the two of those is a big hotel called the Grandview Hotel. That was there for a long time. I do not model that, but I'll show you how my layout fits into all this. I call my layout Uncle Heavy's Ore Lines. Uncle Heavy is a band I used to play in, so everything's Uncle Heavy around here. These are the big baby Trademaster FM units that were used in the 50s and 60s to move ore. And this is a Lloyd Kaiser photo showing kind of the look and feel of this is actually from the 70s, I think, but this is what I'm going for on the layout ultimately in terms of the look and feel. The area that I model, this is showing the Northwestern up in northern Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. They don't actually, maybe this might be the actual borderline here, I'm not sure. But anyway, what I model is right here from Antoine down to, this is a town called Powers, which is where the main line from Green Bay comes up and goes on to Escanaba, and then ultimately up here to Ishpeming, somewhere up here, there's Ishpeming. So there's all kinds of iron ore mills or mines up here, and there were actually several ore docks in Escanaba at one point. There are none now. The last one was torn down a few years ago, and that was the old Northwestern number 6 ore dock. So what's nice for modeling is that there's a main line that comes down through here to Powers and then goes up to Escanaba. But they also built this line up here, which is called the ore line. And that is mainly used for ore, or was, I should say. And that got you to the dock. So it forms a natural loop. And the way I model it is close to the prototype. It's not perfect. But in Antoine here was a yard, and to get to this ore line, you actually went out kind of the west side of the yard to get to that, which works perfectly for the way that I did it. I'd like to say I researched that and worked it all out, but actually I just kind of built a prototypical yard and made it work, and then I discovered later that it actually resembled the prototype. So that was fortunate. This little line here between Loop Line Junction and Kinnesek, I've never seen this in any other drawing, but apparently at some point they were connected there, which works for me because in order to make this work on my layout, I can only get to Kinnesec after Antoine. So I had to kind of rearrange those towns. There is actually a little line that's not shown in this picture that comes down here. The squiggly line here, of course, is the Menominee River, and that's what's providing power in Niagara. So this map doesn't show it, but there's actually a little branch line that comes down from Kinnesec and crosses the Menominee River into Niagara, and that's where we're looking at. This is a picture of my living room wall. It's not often included in these types of clinics, but early in my career as a model railroader, I found this track diagram of Kinnesec Falls and Niagara on eBay. And I just thought it was cool. And it was, I had planned to model this area, but I had no plans to model this paper mill. And this kind of got me going. It's hard to see here, but you can see the mill is down in here, and this is a 1945 diagram that's showing some rearrangement of track that they did. It's a great diagram, and it actually also shows Kinnesec, the main line. It would be way up here, but this is a log yard that where they had 5 or 6 tracks devoted to just switching out pulpwood. And then that led over here, and the log pond was actually right in here where they would soak those things and then bring them up into the debarker. Also very early, I found this drawing by Joe Fulmar, who a lot of people probably know. He's deceased now. He was a Catholic priest, I believe, but also a very active member of the Chicago Northwestern Historical Society. And he did this drawing, which is very true to the track diagram I have hanging on the wall in the other room. And this shows all this. I mean, if I were to try to model this, of course, it would take 2 basements or so. But what we're basically focused on is this area here. This is actually no, this is the bridge. This is the rail bridge, and then down here is the dam, the hydraulic power facility. They had, in addition to that, a coal-fired powerhouse, and this drum Barker building. I had a hard time when I first saw this. I had no idea what that actually meant, but that's actually the building with the rotors and the debarking machine that were turned by the turbines that were also producing power. So this diagram was super helpful. This is a drawing of my layout, and so the areas that have scenery are green. You can see that's a very small area, but it's the area we're looking at today, so that's good. I've got 2 4-track staging yards that are located behind a backdrop here, and that represents the Milwaukee points north and south of my layout, and the northwestern points west of the layout. And these feed the layout into this big yard at Antoine. It's actually not a big yard by railroad standards, but it's big for this area. Certainly it is the only major yard on my layout. And so the trains then can come out of here, and you see this line here that curves around and then goes up and hits. This is the ore line. It goes along the back wall and leads out to this ore dock. The main line goes through Iron Mountain. There's actually Hermansville will be in here. Powers is where this junction is that sends trains back into this staging area. I've recently finished the bench work and started laying track in here. So that'll be my next big project. The turntable is installed here and working, but most of this has yet to be laid and wired and all that. But this area up here has been working for years, and so that's what we'll be focusing on. This is a close-up of the mill, the way that I model it, and so it's got good opportunities for industrial switching here. The tracks are all assigned. These are finished product tracks. In here is where we we put covered hoppers of the additives. The craft mill, these tanks here are where all the chemicals are delivered. And I've yet to build a little unloading tank car unloading facility here on this spur, but that's what's planned there. And then the pulpwood is delivered back here. And we imagine that back behind the layout then is where the log pond is and all of that. The hydraulic dam that's scratch built is here. And then the chipping building and debarking building are kind of half scratch built. There's some kit bashing going on there, but this debarking building, I'll show you in a minute. I've got an old smokestack from another model that I cut up and made into the debarking machine. And this is all kind of hard to see on the layout. So it's which is good because, you know, the detail is a little fudged there. But we'll get it into how this is switched and everything in a minute. We'll go into the models that are used. This is a picture I took. I think I took this picture last night, actually. And this just shows those tracks that I just described. So the branch line comes down here outside off the picture to the right. And then we've got this is the departure track, an arrival track. This is kind of a work track. The depot is down here where you can see this bumper. And then this is the finishing building with the box cars coming out of there. We can also ship by truck. And then this is just some non-rail served industries here, a diner where I do, when I'm switching this, I do sometimes go for beans halfway through the job and imagine that I'm eating at Shelley's Diner. And then there's a Clark station. This Clark gas station is one of the first models that I built after I got back into modeling about 20 years ago. So the first thing I did is start trying to plan this thing out. So this is some of the notes I made. What is that? 6 years ago? Yeah. So these were some Walthers models that I found on their website, and so I sketched out what those dimensions were going to be, and kind of how I would wind up working. This wound up being pretty close. It's not quite right, but there's only 2 tracks here. There's a crossover here, and this is not power anymore. That's the depot. But outside of that, this wound up being pretty close to how it wound up. This is the bottom of that where I tried to sketch out, okay, how are we going to actually work through this and make sure that we can actually switch this and get our work done. And so this actually is also worked out to be that way. And the main point here is that if you're going to build a big industry like that, a little like this, a little planning is recommended. So here we start with, I'm starting with the stuff that was largely just kits, which were fairly easy to build. There is I forget the name of it now, but there's a mill complex basically that Walthers has come up with that all these products belong to. And you'd think they'd make it a little easier to find. It's kind of challenging to find all these things on their website, because I went back to get these part numbers this past week, and it's easier to search Google for what you're looking for, and then Google will find it on Walthers' website, than to try to use the Walthers search function. Maybe I'm not doing it right, but that's been my experience. Anyway, these are the big pulp bins. I've painted these a couple of different colors, and ultimately they need to be weathered and everything. And the entrance into these is right at the top. The peak of these buildings will be connected by a piping to that shipping building, which we'll get to in a minute. But I think we've kind of gone over what happens in these bins. These tanks are where the chips go and are soaked in chemicals and heated, and ultimately that makes them easier to grind up into pulp. Let's see here. So the next thing in line, and I'm not sure I have these 2 buildings in the right order, but they look good. So this is the boiler house. a recovery boiler house. I'm not sure that this is prototypical for a mill of this era, but this is the next stop for the pulp. And this is where a lot of the water that's used in these tanks is recovered. Some of the chemicals are recovered. Some of the products that can be recovered out of this process can actually be sold and shipped out. I don't necessarily do that on this layout yet, but maybe that'll be something that I figure out down the road and start incorporating into the operating system. This building in that first photo was yellow. So it was yellow because I had a bad batch of paint that I used on it and I couldn't match that yellow again. So I just decided everything would be white. It obviously needs to be weathered as well. The next building is the kraft mill. This is, as I mentioned earlier, a process that makes the paper stronger. And so this is all of this description that's in here is just the boilerplate stuff from Walters. But somebody did a nice job of researching and understanding how this all works. So and I always appreciate that with the Walters kits. Usually the first page of the instructions is a nice little essay on how these buildings are used and what they actually do in real life. So that's great. But that in here, ultimately, this pulp is put into its final condition to where it can be poured into that head box, which is the beginning of that Fordrinier process that's still used today. And you can see the next building then is the old mill. I've left this as a brick building. I've thought about painting it white, but the idea is that this is kind of the original building. Now, if you remember the prototypical photos, it's probably about 4 times as long as this. But on a model railroad, compression is necessary. You can see this building has some other problems. We have a door here without a stoop, and it opens right out onto the tracks. So we got to do something about that. The way that I modeled these is I built a foundation for them, and then these things sit on the foundation. And then I reconfigured things, so that needs to be redone where the tanks are and where the recovery boiler house is. But the nice thing is this seam that you see here in the backdrop, this is the staging area. The two shelves of staging are behind this. And so this is a sliding door, basically. And so this can slide out of the way if I ever need to get back into that staging area. Luckily, I haven't had to do that too much. And these buildings all lift right off of their foundation and can be modified. My plan for the future is to make some big signs on this building, that some Kimberly-Clark signage, and also weather it. But anyway, this is the main mill where that Fordrinier machine would be, and where the paper goes through its process. Ultimately, the calendaring would happen at the end of this building, and then this is a close-up of what I was showing at the beginning of the process. This is that finishing building that was built in 1945. All this is just a generic warehouse that Walters provides, and what I did is cut these larger doors in here so that paper is generally loaded and unloaded indoors if possible, or at least a covered area, because obviously the whole process is to dry it out, so you don't want to get it wet at the end of that process. So then this gets into the scratch built part. So this is the Menominee River and the lower Kinnesec Falls. This whole section is removable, and my plan is I don't like the way this is painted, so I'm going to redo that. But anyway, I'll get this level, pour some water in it, a resin product, real water or something like that. And then this will all be frothing water through here. I thought about leveling this out, but actually when I looked at those prototypical photos again, this is, this is actually pretty close to the way the prototype worked, and it'll look more realistic when we have all those water effects on there. This area up here gets way off of the prototype and is kind of a fantasy, but the idea is that the log pond is behind here. And so those logs are dumped into the pond, they soak in there for a while, and then they come up here. This is a conveyor that is going to take the bark that's coming out of the debarking machine that's up here and basically take that to where it can be used for fuel. The logs, after they're debarked, will go into this building, which is a chipping building. And then from here, there will be piping that leads to those bins, so the pulp can get over into the bins and soak there. So that's a little bit more work that needs to be done there. The way this yard works, or the way this industry works in terms of switching, I've just got some kind of animation here. So if you look, we've got a train here. The yellow is the locomotive, the purple is a bulkhead flat car, orange is a tank car, the gray is the covered hopper, and then we've got a couple of box cars on the end and a caboose. So this train has come out of Antoine and is headed up here. This is the ore line that would go around the rest of the room to Felch Junction. What it's going to do is going to come up here and it's going to back down the branch line and over the Menominee River. It's going to come in here to the arrival track, and then the locomotive is going to come off and pick up the caboose, and then it's going to start working these, find out which of these cars need to be picked up. We'll pick up the empty bulkhead flat cars, the empty tank cars, come over here and get an empty covered hopper and put that on the departure track, go over here and get the finished product that needs to be shipped out. And we basically built the outgoing train, and then we'll do the same thing in reverse and deliver whatever needs to be delivered. Now, it won't always be a perfect complement of cars like it is in this case, but then we'll come back here, tack the caboose on the end, and head out of town. The thing that's a little, this is meant to be run as a turn, and so there's a lot of backing up to make this a turn. So I haven't determined if we're going to take this train then out the ore line and just let it run around the layout until it arrives in Escanaba. In that case, it's not really a turn. If it's going to be a turn, it would have to back into Antoine again. And a lot of this track to Antoine is a hidden track, and backing up on hidden track is generally not a great idea. I mean, the track work in here is pretty solid, but I'm not sure I want to make a regular practice of backing up on it. So we'll see how that all turns out, but that is essentially the operating design of this industrial area. So the last piece, and I put this picture here to show, the idea here is this was a big multi-million-dollar addition to add this building and the machines and everything. You'd think they'd probably figure out something to do with these windows instead of just leaving them looking into a blank wall. So I need to take that out and probably board those up. And I thought it'd be cool to, put a different style of brick there and provide the detail. So you see that all the time in older buildings where a newer brick is in what was windows that were repurposed. There's another opportunity for that on the other side of this building as well. Also on that, you can't really see it, but this is a good picture here to show too. There's no, I have a box full of roof details that need to be added to this finishing building, because ventilation would be very important at that point. So some of the things that I'm planning to do to improve this area, completing that dam, pouring the water and the water effects that I was just talking about. There's a tank loading unloading facility that's missing, which would be right down here at the end of this track. I have ground foam in here, but I would like to add static grass, not like it's a meadow or anything, but just to have some strands of grass and weeds through here that would be a little bit more realistic. All the buildings need to be weathered. The rolling stock, as I mentioned, is kind of loosely appropriate to the prototype. I'd like to narrow that down and get a little more specific. And then this view block, which you can kind of see here, is all the same kind of trees. And so I plan to intersperse some different trees in that to make it look a little more realistic. Putting people and garbage and everything else in these scenes is also really important. I've done some of that over here in the areas outside of this picture at the diner and the gas station. And so this area is next. I really wasn't sure if this was all going to work perfectly, and it doesn't work perfectly, but this end is good. These foundations can stay. I have to rework the foundations over where the bins are and everything. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I think there's some good opportunities to put some big signs here. This little sign here, which you can't see, there is a logo on it. It's a decent sign, but I'd like to have some big. What I want to do is I forget the name of the machine, but I can do some really intricate cuts on this machine I got from Micromart in styrene, and so I think it'd be cool to put a backlit sign that says Kimberly Clark up there and weather it. So those are some of the things that are planned, and I think that's it. Here's a Lloyd Kaiser photo of the Niagara depot. Obviously this is a picture from the 70s by the looks of this Caprice, but I love the beat up look of this thing, and weeds growing out of the foundation and all that. That's I have a stand-in model for the Niagara depot right now, but it doesn't look like this. So any questions?
Very nicely done, Greg. Good,
Thanks, Neil.
nice modeling, excellent PowerPoint.
Thank you.
Beautiful presentation, Greg.
Oh, thanks a
Beautiful.
lot. Appreciate it.
Rod, you remember we were talking about the corn plant in Cedar Rapids
Yeah.
that made starch.
Uh-huh.
I need to be sending Greg some of my starch over there
There you go. There you go.
because that's exactly what they used it for, I think.
I'll bet it is. Yeah. Perfect.
Greg, am impressed by the amount of preparation and planning that you've done, and then how very well it appears you've carried it off. Looks impressive, and I'm sure very satisfying.
Thanks, Larry. All right, well, that's all we've got today. Unless there's anything else anybody wants to talk about, we'll be back at it on Thursday, not this week. We're taking this week off for Christmas, but we'll be back on Thursday night, I think it's the 29th. And the program for that will either be our friend Clark, or it will be Ron presenting
Mount Fletcher.
Right, that's right. Mont's work doing some vehicle modeling. So either way, it'll be something that you won't want to miss. This, of course, has been recorded. Oh, we got 5 people on Facebook Live too. Holy cow! Look out, we're going viral. So anyway, I'll send out a note when this recording is available, and we'll see you guys again soon. Have a great Saturday.
Great job, Greg.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks,
Greg.
Greg. Nice to have Gordy on from England here too.
Oh yeah, definitely. Bye-bye now.